Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November event by the BCS Nottingham Derby. Tonight's speaker is Paul Teven, who's hopefully visible on your screen, and he's a fellow of the Netherlands Computer Society. So just want to go through a few notices before we start. It'll only take a couple of minutes. And if you can have your phones ready, because I'll be display some QR codes. But before we begin, some netiquette. Can you ensure your microphone is on mute and your video is off during the presentations? Questions will come at the end. So if you can put your questions into the questions pane, which is available as one of the options on the screen. Otherwise, use the chat if it's not available. Please be aware there's a lot of people joining us, so there are others. And we're quite some multinational tonight. Please be welcoming and respectful, and understand there are differences of opinion. Please be friendly and patient, especially when asking questions. And be open to questions and all viewpoints as well, I ask you to do. But above all, please be kind and considerate to others. So thank you. As part of the branch's inclusion and diversity driver, can I ask you to scan the QR code there? It's just to answer a few questions, and it's not just about inclusion and diversity. It's also about, there's some questions about future events, just to give us some suggestions about what you might like us to put on. And my colleague Gary has already put the URL into the chat if you want to use the that link instead. Thank you. We do have a website for BCS Nottingham Derby, and that's where we promote our events. So you'll find there's already one in place for next month, and I'll go through that in a few minutes. You'll find the aims of the branch, who's on the committee, anything about the AGM, and upcoming and past events. The past events, a lot of them have videos, so you can watch the event again. And again, there's a QR code there should you wish to scan it with your phone, or Gary has the chat in the chat the URL. And for our winter program, please check our website. There is the next event, which is in association with Nottingham Trent University, is about using generative techniques to produce artworks by Simon Schofield. And that will be on the 17th of January 2022, 1900 GMT. Again, there's a QR code there, should you wish to scan it. Or you can find the link on our website. So, let me introduce and hand over to our speaker, Paul. So, Paul, I'll stop sharing and I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Paul. Let me get to my, not give away the most important slide. Okay, so I've been working in enterprise architecture for about 25 years, and when I started, people were very dissatisfied with enterprise architects. And if you're here around, then it might still look like people are still dissatisfied with enterprise architect. And then the question comes up, didn't we make any progress? Or positively, yes, I think we have made progress, but there have also been some other things happening. And that is what I will show to you in this presentation. So I became an enterprise architect in 1998, and actually I became a manager of enterprise architects. I had 6 enterprise architects, technical architects in my group who dealt with network, desktop, server, etc. And they were really focused on the technology. And they were good people. But I came from a consulting organization, and that's a little bit different. And Why that is relevant, I'll show you in a minute. So I changed also a little bit. So my ties got a little bit more colorful and my hair not. So that's me. I have to do some acknowledgements to Eleanor Bakker, who works at bol.com. She presented in a Dutch architecture conference in 2019, and Ben Heideveld, who presented for the Open Group the material of Shell. You'll note those slides a little bit later. So what is the intent of this this lecture presentation? Well, we talk about how it's all started. And it started with the architects as being the protectors, the knights protecting the IT landscape. And the notion that enterprise architects could have customers was something that was not there, but it came up. Business is a customer, development is a customer. And then came TOGAF. And I have been with TOGAF since about 2009. It's existed before. And it looked like TOGAF is the winner of the enterprise architecture competition. And so if you ask, is there any other method for enterprise architecture? Then yeah, in the past there was Zekman or EAF, but now it's all TOGAF. But then the question is, of course, is it the winner in an ever smaller market, or is it still growing? And my honest answer is, I don't know. So we had TOGAF, and then we had Agile. Now, and we'll talk about a little bit about those two in combinations. And I will also indicate that some of the good ideas in Agile actually work also very good in Waterfall. So while Agile has its merits, some of the things you do in Agile and you don't in Waterfall, they will hurt you if you do Waterfall. And then you start doing Agile and doing those best practices, and then you will improve. Well, anyway, what is the future? The enterprise architect is a trusted advisor of the business and a helper of the developers. And that will be shown in the examples of Shell and bol.com. Now, around 2000, what was the enterprise architect? The protector of the IT landscape. People with bad ideas, they should be fought. Enterprise architect tried to do that. And what resulted in developers hating him, hating the architects, business people trying to ignore them. When we look back, when I look back at my teams, then I have to say most of the time the architects were right. But as a consultant, I also learned that being right is not enough. You have to help people understand that you are right and influence the business developers in doing the things you are proposing. So there was a bottleneck, there was a problem. And the role is very nice. And it was good, comfortable staying there in the ivory tower, but it had its limits. So we had customers as enterprise architects, and customers were management. For one, we tried to discuss with the management, the business users, how their IT landscape should look like. And I'm focusing on their landscape. We as IT people often think that it's about our landscape, our projects, It's not our project, it's their project. If business people don't care about their projects, then we stop. It's not our project, it's their project. They have business objectives and they should achieve them. So business is a customer. Developers is also a customer because you make wonderful architecture designs. And then what happens? People know the piles of lines and boxes in drawers, which are never looked at. And therefore, it's a task of the enterprise architect to make sure that developers, they go further with the designs you made as an architect. Having said that, when we talk about users, there's not a lot of interfacing with users by enterprise architects. So users figure mostly in the implementation phase. There are some subject matter experts, of course, but to say that users are a customer group for enterprise architects, I have not experienced that a lot. So maybe it's an omission, maybe not. It's a fact for me. And whether it's a good fact or a bad fact, I don't know. But management and developers is very important. And then we got TOGAF. Everything moved towards TOGAF, and well, the symbol of TOGAF is this famous ADM, architecture development method. And what you saw happening is that also consultancies who had their own methods, they more and more they moved towards TOGAF because, well, TOGAF was the winner, and then you go along with the winner. TOGAF is a framework. And why do you need a framework? Well, it's a practical starting point for enterprise architecture. So if you don't know how to do enterprise architecture, you can take the book, TOGAF, and it says how you should do it. So you don't have to panic because the challenges are actually quite big. What is good about TOGAF is, well, for framework in general maybe, but for TOGAF also, is it has in it what others have used. So yeah, okay, if you accept you need a framework, then the question is, yeah, why do you need TOGAF? Could you have used something else? Well, you could have, but you cannot anymore. If you have done the TOGAF course, then you will have seen this foil, this slide, where it's advertised why TOGAF is good. It's a comprehensive method. You can combine it with other frameworks. It's widely adopted. It's based in best practices, and that's actually very true. Also, so the platinum sponsors of the open group, like IBM, HP, Capgemini at times, they donated their best practices to TOGAF. And a colleague of mine, she taught architecture in IBM, and she says, yeah, I recognize all kind of stuff which was in the IBM courses, and it's now in TOGAF. Maybe a little bit speculative on my side. I have been the chairman of the working group on architecture, and there we had a question: should we have a definition, and should we have standards, and so on and so on. And architects keep arguing about that forever. So I think what has happened in the USA is that a couple of business managers, IT managers, CIOs, they have said, what do we need? We need a standard for architecture. And what do we need? We choose? And one said TOGAF, and the others ones, they nodded. And so it was TOGAF. So it's good that architects didn't discuss about it too long, and that someone else decided for them that it should be TOGAF. And as for the advertisements of the open group, are they true or not? In general, yes. So the green ones are the ones which hold true. So general methods, complementary to other frameworks. Yes, and my observation, the most important one is with project management, because in the practice, in companies, you have a project management cycle, and you want to have an enterprise architecture or an architecture cycle, and how do those two fit together? That's a key thing for success in enterprise architecture or architecture more in general. Widely adopted in the market, yes. Tailorable, yes, but slimmed down. So the method has quite a lot of stuff in it, which it's not possible to do everything. Some other things, reinventing the wheel, business and IT alignment, yes, it helps you to do that, but it's still difficult. To participate in the evolution of the framework, that's theory. If your boss is a platinum sponsor, then you have a chance that your ideas get converted. Otherwise, it's difficult. What you see is, I mentioned it shortly. When TOGAF really got traction, then other consultancies like Capgemini, but others as well, they abandoned their own approaches and joined. And especially in 9.0, Capgemini succeeded in getting a lot of business architecture stuff into to TOGAF. So that was quite good. And how did TOGAF look in 2009? There was the ADM, architecture development method, and how you develop architecture step by step. There's architecture content framework, the stuff you need to make. There is reference models, and those who have done the course will recognize the TRM and the IIIRM, and the others will not know what I'm talking about. There's guidelines and techniques. There is this enterprise continuum, also exclusively for people who have taken the course, and there's the architecture capability framework. Now, actually, since 2009, not a lot happened. They talked like architects, but it's now 9.2, and a new release should be forthcoming, has been announced permanently. I would say now, that's not quite true, but say the last 1.5 years, the new release is imminent, and there's an excuse for COVID and so on, but we are kind of waiting for the next release. Okay, ADM, that looks pretty good. Architecture content framework is under pressure. And it's under pressure from another open group standard, namely Archimate. So Archimate is a description language for architecture. And of course, it's a wonderful thing because it has been produced by Dutchmen. But it has also a content framework, and the content framework competes with that of TOGAF. These reference models, IRM and TRM, they are obsolete. The guidelines and techniques, they need some updating. The concept of industry architectures is very useful, but there's a lot of other stuff in this enterprise continuum. An industry architecture, for instance, beyond banking architecture network, that's an example architecture for a bank. And if you would do a new bank, then you could take that as a starting point. So for several industries, there are industry architectures. So for Dutch cities, for instance, there is a GEMA, en dus een gemeentelijke architectuur. The city of Nottingham or the city of Derby, if they were Dutch cities, they would use the city architecture, which is a standard city architecture for cities in the Netherlands. And suppliers have built solutions according to those industry architectures, in this case, city architectures. Okay, so that's the idea of industry architectures, and it's quite a powerful thing. In the energy business, there is the SGAM model, Smart Grid Architecture Model, and that's for electricity distribution, and that's an industry architecture which was founded by the European Union at the time, including Britain, I think. Now, then there's the architecture capability framework, and that could be a little bit simplified. Okay, content framework. Also, adapting TOGAF is allowed according to the book. So instead of taking the TOGAF architecture framework, you can also take another content framework. We had also Zegman in the past. It's now a little bit going away. And yeah, to use a modern word, trending is Archimate. Archimate content framework is trending. It's a difficult choice to make to take a content framework. You don't have to do it every year. It's typically something you do every 3, 4, 5 years. So maybe don't worry too much. But if you do like a major merger, then you have 2 companies. They have their own content framework, and maybe one is TOGAF, one is Archimate. Yeah, what do you do? No. I think Archimate is trending, but that might be influenced by my Dutch nationality. But still, I think it's strong. When companies say we use the ADM, then generally you can say when they say we use TOGAF, they mean we use the ADM. In other parts of TOGAF, they make their own choices, but generally the ADM is followed. Either you do the ADM or you don't do enterprise architecture. ADM is pretty much standard. And I would say then if you don't do the ADM, then you don't do TOGAF. It's a little bit strict, but we have to have some rules. Now, these ADM phases, the preliminary phase, you see here on top, that's the preparation of being able to do architecture work. You look for a content framework, the architecture process, the governance, who decides on architecture, where are the people, where are the teams. That's done in this preliminary phase. And then you go round from A to G, more or less, and those are initiatives. And you have a question from the business, and then you start initiatives. So there are multiple instances of this cycle. And what do you do in the cycle? You start with an architecture vision, where you make a high-level description of the opportunity and a solution concept. And in phases B to D, you make the architectures. Phase A to F, you make the roadmap. And in phase G, the projects start. And those are the real projects with developers and implementation and stuff. And there, your role as an architect is to help the developers in succeeding according to the architecture. That's what you try to achieve here. And in phase H, that's more or less monitoring the health of this whole process. Can talk a lot more about that, but that's for the course, for the training course. So my perception is that architects don't make architectures, architects make roadmaps. And roadmaps is something which has value for the business, because then the business knows when they are getting what. And therefore, only making architectures, that's not useful. The end product is the roadmap, and the architectures are a semi-finished product. This word plateau is also known as transition architecture. Plateau is the Dutch word, and it's also used in Archimate. So it's a step-by-step realization of the business benefits which you are getting at the end. And phase G, that's where the implementation is, where the rubber hits the road, as the Americans say. Now, what do you do in this phase G? As an architect, you cannot dump the complete enterprise architecture on a project. Hopefully, the project is limited to part of the business, has a limited scope. Therefore, not all enterprise architecture is relevant for your project. But someone has to tell the project what parts are relevant, or they should be able to find it out. Now, in practice, it's good that the enterprise architect helps the project with this selection of enterprise artifacts from the enterprise architecture, which are relevant for the project. Now, in this solution concept, which you have made in this phase A, this sketch of the solution, there might be some tricky things, new technologies, innovative uses, and you might be willing to describe them. And then this would fit in the project initiation document. If you use Prince 2, you have a PIT as very important, or maybe even the only stage gate. It's more something of the past, but the most important stage gate in Prince 2 is the PIT. After the PIT is approved, then serious money is being spent, and there you want to be there as an architect.
Just to let you know, Paul, we're 30 minutes through.
Yeah, okay. So it's important to have this project initiation document when it's approved, that this project start architecture is also included there. But on the other hand, if that point is passed, then new architecture requirements is not possible anymore. While you can do a change request for after implementation. But having new brilliant ideas about enterprise architecture when the project is already underway, there's nothing project managers hate more than that. So at the bit it is speak now or be forever silent, as they said it in old American movies at the marriage. Okay, then to the question, Agile or TOGAF, or both. And if you ask a difficult question to a consultant, then he will often say, it depends. And if you're lucky, then he will also say, on what it depends. Tonight, you are lucky. So it depends on your belief in business strategy. So if you think business strategy is important, valid, then by all means go with TOGAF, and that is classical TOGAF, just like I explained. And within this work packages, you can do a little bit of Agile. Now, there are also companies or people, they say business strategy, ha 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 ha, that's something of the past. Current needs over predictability. What we need now, that's what matters. And there are very serious companies working like that. And so like Spotify, who have also showed that in a couple of YouTube videos. You can find that under Spotify engineering culture. And there's 2 videos describing how they do it. And it's really more with scrums, and they realize they need some architecture guidance every now and there. And in the past, they talked in these Agile people about YACNI. That's not a word you hear a lot nowadays, but it stood for you ain't gonna need it. So rather than think about what you would need next year, you can better drink a beer, because everything you think of, it's not going to be needed in a year's time. Well, for some companies that's true, and for some companies that's not true. So if you are a bank, then the Dutch National Bank will expect some things as being predicted that you will have next year. So even if ING went very much on this thing, they do have to guide some developments for more predictability. Now, of course, you have mixed forms, and this bimodal IT is one example of that. You have two or maybe 3 parts in your enterprise architecture or in your landscape, really, and they have different speeds, and you connect those roadmaps in specific moments, and that's trying to combine it with 2 or 3. And there is also examples, and the bol.com example is one of them, has done that, taken that to multiple domains, and at some point they had 37 business domains, and they kind of independently developed themselves with some coordination. So you have coordination as very important and coordination as unimportant here under. So predictability, not needed. Current needs, that's what it is. So you have to make a choice. what fits you by company or maybe per domain, a little bit depending on the size. Well, some of these things which are very stressed in agile projects, business owner on the team, subject matter experts on the team, dedicated teams, dedicated persons, limiting work in process. If you do that in waterfall, it works much better as well. But it does not detract from agile, but I don't think it's specific to agile. It also works in waterfall. So some practice examples. If you are a big company, how do you divide your enterprise architecture? Well, most of the time, big companies have business units. These business units must work more or less independently. They have to make a profit, so they need room to maneuver. So they have their own things. But at times they will think, okay, we can do things together and have a shared capability. For instance, a web shop. For instance, business unit A is mountaineering. This is deep sea diving. But yeah, it's very different, of course. But a web shop, they both need. Can it be technically the same web shop? Yes. Are the products the same? Probably not. And maybe a data center or in a moderner now a shared Amazon contract could be shared. And there's always one or two business units that don't want to participate at all. And then there is this red band, and yeah, there's regulated capabilities that are needed. For instance, in a bank, you will have risk management. The board, but also the national bank, wants to calculate the dollar risk, the country risk, etc. And so you have an overall capability, and you can't escape from that. Now, negotiating this picture is a role of the enterprise architect, and is something which he or she has to do with the remark that IT people generally think of have a tendency more for centralization than business people. So often you will hear IT people say that, yeah, if we do it together, it is better, but that's not enough. It's better because it's cheaper, or we can sell products which we otherwise could not sell, or it's less risks. Those are valid business reasons, but it's better because it's together. That's a no-go for business people. Now, then to Shell. What has Shell done? They have a project management approach, and they subordinated the architecture deliverables under that project management approach. They made a selection out of TOGAF content framework, but the interesting thing is that the same artifacts are produced whether it's waterfall or agile, and they use Archimate as a modeling language. It's only 2 slides out of this presentation of Ben Heideveld, and I'm not going to explain it in detail, but here on the top, you see the project management cycle, and you see per phase which TOGAF artifacts are made, and these are from phases A and B, these from phase C, and these from phase D. And these color mean that there's modifications on previously produced artifacts. And if you go to the agile world, you see a different project management staging with a pretty big upfront design. And here you see the sprints. the time fails me to explain it in detail, and but if you look at it in detail, it's quite interesting. Bol.com, well, it's a new company. Yeah, autonomous teams with limited scope, achieving new results, fast and decisive. They have multiple teams within a business domain, and let me show that. So they have divided the business in a number of business domains, and they call that products. Don't ask me why. They're worried. So each product has an architect, and the architects together are responsible for the whole. That's what we would call enterprise architecture, but they don't use that word. So here illustrated, the architecture team is responsible for the whole, and here you see these teams. And these are feature teams, and they have architects as well, and that's the level of solution architect. And the product architect is responsible for the product. Now, such an architect, solution architect, if you will, he or she could help 2 or 3 agile teams, for these feature teams. And so here 3. That was okay. 4, then it was already stretched. Agile teams don't wait for you as an architect. So they go, and yeah, well, if you're too late, you are too late. And if you have 4 teams, then the chances are that you will be too late. So that was stretched, and then these products, they got bigger and bigger, and the number of teams got bigger and bigger. And then the whole concept of this solution architect taking care of all these teams didn't work anymore. It was spread too thin. So what did they do? So they had these solution architects outside of the teams. Here, the teams, these are the DevOps teams, including Run. And there were also some other specialists. And these other specialists were taken into the teams, whereas the solution architects, they were, say, promoted towards the product level and the product owner. So these architects, they are more or less the right hand of the product owner, making sure that the product IT strategy, if you will, is a sound IT strategy. And that leads to their value proposition. Why are architects useful? Because they enable better decision making. And why do they do it? No, they have been trusted advisors. They are champions of the long term and silo busters. And so here this notion of protecting the IT landscape comes back, but in a different role, much more as trusted advisor of business people and working with the teams in this new world. And what I have left out is that the solution architecture is taken up by the senior designers in a new situation, and that the solution architects are much more on call in case of issues, but that in, say, normal circumstances, the senior designers can take care of what is needed in the teams. But that's also a question of maturity and experience. So, have we made any progress? I think yes. So the new architect is also a business consultant, acting as a trusted advisor to these business unit managers. They participate in key projects. So the idea of the architect in the ivory tower no, an enterprise architect should work about half time in the big and important projects. The architect helps the development teams, but yeah, the gap is still there. But because what is requested, what is required, has gone up also tremendously, and we have trouble catching up. So yes, we have made a lot of progress. We are doing really well, I think, but customer satisfaction is still something to work on. So yeah, that's about what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Paul. If that's your last slide, I'll hand over to Gary for going through the questions and answers, please.
Thanks, Paul and Paul. First question is from Paul. Would you say that TOGAF certification should be mandatory for holding an enterprise architect role?
Well, I think the question is, no, the answer is TOGA certification is required to getting the role. And with that, the question kind of evaporates. I teach it a lot, and say people of my generation, say 60 plus, and they could do it without TOGAF. But if you are more like, say, 40 and younger, then don't skip it. It's a good investment.
Okay, great. The next question is from Finn. How do we know that enterprise architects foster better decision making, and how do you measure better?
Well, if you look at capability maturity models, measurement happens in level 4. And we have, in the financial crisis, have had severe setbacks from, say, 3.5 to 2.5. So we don't measure a lot. There has been talk about measurement in the, say, what was it, 2005, 2000. But then it kind of disappeared. I think to measure KPIs, which you could do is measure how many projects do have a project start architecture, and you can do a customer satisfaction survey of your business manager you are serving and what they think of you. But it's a very open field still. Yeah.
Thank you. Sabu asks, what are the key differences between an enterprise, solution, and technical architect?
Okay. Generally, an enterprise architect has a broader scope. Solution architect is a person which is kind of working on a project. So I consider project architect and solution architect more or less as synonyms. And then you can do that in different fields. You can do that in business domain, information, data domain, application domain, or technical domain, network domain, and enterprise technical architect, like Paul and I were at Aeon, kind of viewed the technical area in broad terms. And then solution architect, they worked on specific projects. But we tried to help these projects with our guidance.
Okay, thanks. All right, that's it for the questions in the chat window. Oh, no, one's just come in from Hugh. Do you think that the adoption of Archimate has been driven by the defense industry, NATO, Architectural Framework version 4 in January 2018, or was it being widely adopted across other industries beforehand?
Yes, But then I'm talking about the Netherlands mainly. So there it has a broad following and it's more or less the standard for architecture description. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion about Archimate because it also used to be a tool. Now it's as a standard, they have had to rename the tool. This is the tool from the BIS design. So Archimate is foremost a description language of architectures. And you see other businesses or governments. For instance, the Swiss government is now also has chosen Archimate as the modeling language for architecture. So that's from a quite different area. So yeah, but of course it helps having such big customers. But there are more than that.
Thanks, Paul. All right, unless anyone beats me to it, there are no more questions in the chat window. So if anyone would like to ask their question in person, either write hello in the chat window and we will unmute you, or use the unmute me function in the Zoom control panel and we will unmute you and you'll be free to ask your question. We still have 9 minutes to go. I'll give it a moment to see if there are any responses. There we go, got a question coming in from Praveen. If I am after a TOGAF certification, would that make sense to wait for the next revision?
That's a difficult question, and the reason is that the open group is infamously bad in predicting when the next version will come. So I live in a world where the next release of TOGAF is imminent for about 1.5 to 2 years, and so that's one. The second one is that it's not known how big the change will be. So I don't know. I'm killing my business if I say postpone it. So I don't know. It's so in terms from what I teach, I teach IT architects getting ready also for this business advisor role. I came into KPMG as an IT nerd, I can say, and I learned the hard way to be a business consultant, and it was not easy. And I'm still not a great business consultant, but I'm an okay business consultant. I'm a good IT architect, so in the combination, that makes me a little bit unique. So in my courses, yeah, you learn a lot, irrespective of the version of TOGA. There's other courses, they are more, say, focused on the method and the exam and the certification. So, here the answer is it depends. If you say I need a new job, do it now. If you say, well, I could wait 1 or 2 years, then I would say you can wait.
I was going to add, Paul, that in terms of my background, I did a bit of a boot camp on IT consultancy. It was based on management consultancy principles, and I was encouraged to do it by a number of independent contractors in the UK who went on the course themselves because it was seen as quite a well-recognised certificate to have. and it's certainly a set of techniques I still use to augment my enterprise architecture role.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, there are no more questions in the chat window. If we don't get anything in the next few seconds, I'll hand it back over to Paul Stevens and he can wrap up.
Okay then, so thank you very much, Paul, and thank you all for joining today.
Okay, here I see. Yeah, this is a nice question, and that's my very last slide.
Yes.
I'll take that because I have. So for time's sake, I have skipped it a little bit, but business architecture, and do we need to work with a business process architect? Yeah, the answer is yes. We do need to work with a business architect, but when he or she is not there, what do we do? We cannot force the business to have a business architect. Should we do the work ourselves? And my answer would be rather not. What you see happening now is a trend towards business capabilities modeling, where you model which features the business should have, rather than say write down the processes. And a example with business design is pretty active in this thing, and they talk about for an army the boots on the ground business capability. So the idea that you can have soldiers anywhere in the world within 24 hours, and that would be a business capability that you need as an army. And based on that, you can do actually quite a lot of IT modeling. And this business capability thing you see also whether you do a lot of portfolio management. I work now a lot in Germany, and these tools like Alphabet and LeanIX, they really focus on portfolio management, and they do that also based on capabilities. In the Netherlands, you have this business design and modeling and Archimate, and that's a little bit a different take on this. So so that's for my successors to work on. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Paul. Yeah.
Right. That's okay. Some other question appeared in. So just to wrap up, as we're coming up to the end of the session, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Paul, for presenting this evening. I did see earlier on there was a request about the video that will appear on the BCS Nottingham Derby website sometime in the next month. But apart from that, all I can say to you is, as this is our last event, a happy Christmas and a happy New Year to you. So, and hope to see some of you next year.
Okay, thanks.